Good afternoon. On a snowy day, snowy afternoon here in Davos, to everybody online, thank you for joining us. Everybody in the room, thank you for joining. This is not Henry Kissinger's session, so if anybody but this is very much a 21st century question, and I'm really pleased that the forum has brought us together on this subject. The issue of all of the transitions necessary in order to combat the climate crisis and to reset our relationship with nature. These sessions are sprinkled across the agenda all week. It's very much a mainstream topic here. But there are some absolutely critical dependencies if we are going to make these transitions smoothly and in time. Critical dependencies if we're going to have that revolution in renewable energy, which is the sort of precursor of the energy transition. And one of the most important dependencies is having the jobs and the skilled workforce necessary to be able to drive that forward. Now, the World Economic Forum has for a number of years been working on this and conducting research, which is very, very important. I think it's going to go up on the screen in a minute. This work's really important because in and around the Paris Agreement, just 5, 6, 7 years ago, I think everybody was sort of saying, well, there's no jobs in the transition, or there aren't. Nobody knew what we meant by a green job. Nobody knew exactly whether they were going to be more or less. Obviously, there are geographic inconsistencies. Some areas are going to have to re-identify themselves, perhaps from being coal mining or coal communities to being something else. And of course, there's a generational shift. So I think the WEF's done really important and very high quality work in this area, really looking at what is a green job and then where are the green jobs going to be. And this isn't just about energy. It's not just about no more coal, going to solar panels. It's in every sector of the economy that we're seeing a shift. And so up on the screen, you've just got a screenshot of just the enormity, really, of the shift that we have to make, but the extraordinary opportunity in a world which has very young populations in very important countries around the world. That there is really something to be very excited about. Of course, getting this into the rhetoric of our political leaders so that they're talking about these opportunities and then actually putting policies in place to make this happen with some of the stuff we're going to talk about now. So we've got a very distinguished panel who've got a lot to say coming from different dimensions of the problem. So first of all, I'm going to go to Alan Blue from LinkedIn. And I think that you've probably got the greatest vantage point, or an extraordinary vantage point. You can see across this whole issue. And it would be great if you could kick us off with, talk about the demand that you see and then how we can respond to that.
Absolutely. So thanks, everybody. Good to see you all, and thank you for having me. So LinkedIn, we have about 875 million users in our network, and each person provides a profile publicly about what they do and what they know. Plus, hundreds of thousands of companies post jobs on LinkedIn. So we have a pretty good idea of the supply and demand when we analyze all of that data, which is where our information comes from. A few years ago, we began breaking up the skills which were on people's profiles and in the job descriptions, and we identified a bunch of them as green skills. So basically, we have a handful of jobs which we call fully green jobs. These are the ones which are unique to the non-carbon economy, and they include obvious things like solar panel installation and so forth. That's actually a very small collection of the jobs. And even the research that you can read, if you look at the QR code, we're actually looking at probably 1% of the jobs that exist in the world. The vast majority of jobs that are going to be affected by the transition are, in fact, these greening jobs, where basically a job that we're all very familiar with right now becomes a little bit different, in some cases a lot different from what it is right now. So the skill mix for a given job shifts to include a set of green skills. So it was a surprise to me, but the fastest growing green skill on LinkedIn is in fashion. So basically, eco-conscious fashion is the one which has grown 263% in the last 5 years. That's an example of a job which we might be familiar with, but which is becoming new and different. Across the entire set of jobs we look at, we see roughly between 5.5% and 11% on average growth year over year in terms of demand. But we see slightly less than that in terms of growth of supply of workers who actually have those skills. So in a place like renewables, energy renewables, where we see a 90% increase, this is well outside that average amount, we see only roughly a 70% increase in the number of people who have those skills. So it's a challenge that we see where basically the supply is growing, if you will, arithmetically, but the demand is growing exponentially. And as we begin to break ground on more of the things we need to do, as we mitigate climate change and move to the non-carbon future, the demand is only going to increase. And what we're talking about today is how do we meet that demand?
So that's a perfect segue to the Commissioner Nicholas Schmidt, Commissioner for Jobs and Social Rights. So a fascinating brief. So obviously you're the Commission. You have a beautiful and varied collection of member states. So and the EU has very aggressive targets. There's some that would say they're not aggressive enough, but they are aggressive targets for the climate transition or the green energy transition in particular. So how do you think as the Commission about moving the European workforce to the point where it can deliver on those targets?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and to participate into this very fascinating debate on really an issue which is of utmost importance. Now, I just wanted to say first that remember, with the green jobs, it's a bit like the same thing as it was with digital. When the whole digital process started, this process was conceived or presented as a big threat. And the same thing is about the greening of our economy. It's a threat for normal jobs. We will lose millions of jobs. Now we know, at least we have the impression, that nor the digital, nor the greening of our economy will be a process of losing millions of jobs. Certainly there will be jobs lost, but especially there will be a lot of jobs created, different jobs, and that's the point, that's the problem, and there will be a transformation of many of the jobs which exist already today. And you mentioned it. The purely green jobs, well, probably they are relatively limited. When I look at the list, well, it has disappeared now. Well, even those who are installing heat pumps or solar panels, well, they have some kind of basic electricity skills. They did some other jobs before, and now they have to be trained on this particular job of installing heat pumps or solar panels. Now, what the Commission is doing is now that we say, well, this transition will not be automatic. We have to accompany it to make it successful and to make it beneficial for everybody. So we have to take away this impression of threat, but we have to transform the threat into huge opportunities and giving people the feeling and also the certainty that we are there to help them to enter into this new world, be it the green world as I think also the digital one. By the way, digital and green, there are a lot of connections in between. So I think this is what we call the just transition. And skilling people, helping them to find new jobs or to be able to do their transformed jobs in many areas, this is what we try to put very much forward. Well, as I said, I think this morning already, we mobilized 750, or even the president said 800 billion euros to accompany this transformation, green and digital. And part of that is also reskilling people. And we have a fund with, I think, about 20 billion, which is Transition Fund, which we have focused mainly on regions. You have mentioned coal, and we all know that in the US, the coal regions have been affected a lot by closing the coal mines. To say, no, we will close this, but we will help you immediately to transform this with new activities. And I think this is what the policy is all about, and working with member states, working with regions to show that there is a life, there's a job, there's a future beyond the traditional energy or a traditional activity. We can help these activities to be transformed or replaced. That's what we are doing in Poland a lot. We can give these workers new opportunities in renewable energy, but also we have an enormous challenge in renovating buildings, because even with renewable energy, we still have to be a bit more focused on energy saving. And so renovating our buildings, for instance, is a big challenge. There are millions of buildings that have to be renovated, and we do not have the skilled people to do it. So I think there is an issue where we put a lot of money in training people for these jobs, taking them from other activities away, giving them good opportunities to find a new job in this example. That's what we try to discuss with all kinds of stakeholders, member states first, but also regions. We are very much focused on the regions in Europe, especially those affected by the transformation, building up alternatives and bringing and taking people along. I think this transformation will only be successful and without too much turmoil if we convince people that this is a good opportunity for them, and they will not be at the end the losers of it. It's not the globalization. The problem with globalization was a lot of people felt to be the losers of globalization, and I need not insist on the consequences of that. This time we really have to show that there are a lot of good opportunities. By the way, while all these calculations are a bit, are interesting, but nobody knows, we think that millions of new jobs can be created, but we have to do that to skill people and to have the right investments in these new activities. That's what the Commission is accompanying and pushing member states into that direction.
So this is very interesting because there's a clear role, a clear role from the policy point of view, that there is a role in communicating to the public and to them going in hand with member states, with regions, but also I assume companies with the private also. Sector.
Absolutely, right? Companies. Well, that's absolutely necessary that we take companies along and work closely with the we have organized now the economy in 14 big sectors, and nearly all sectors are impacted by the greening, by the green transformation. And so we have to work with these sectors, be it agriculture, be it tourism, be it automotive. We all know big transformation towards the electric cars. So, and working with companies and also with the unions, because people accept to be retrained if they understand the purpose, if they understand where we will lead them. Then I think because reskilling or skilling is also a mindset issue. And this is probably the most difficult one. And this is also what we try to discuss with all the stakeholders in this context.
So let's segue to then the private sector partners. So to Elizabeth Gaines, so you're a company in transition as well. So a resources company leading through the transition. What is the skills, the access to the skills and talent that you need? How do you view it, and how do you see the partnership also then back with government on that?
Thanks, Rachel, and good to be here this afternoon. Look, Fortescue, for those who are not that familiar with us, I mean, we're one of the largest iron ore producers in the world. We're regarded as a resources company, but in fact, we're transitioning to be a resources and renewable energy company, and we intend to generate renewable energy. Green hydrogen is the key focus. So that in itself is a significant transition for our company. In addition to that, we've made the decision to achieve net zero, real zero emissions by 2030 by eliminating the use of fossil fuels throughout our mining operations. So that is a big commitment. And basically what that will do is it will eliminate the use of about 1 billion litres of diesel every year through our mining operations. Now, to do that, we have to take our workforce on a journey with us, and we will have to retrain and reskill people. That's going to be critically important. We're going to go from a mining operation that relies on 24/7 fuel availability, fossil fuel at the moment, to renewable energy. We'll have to go to more of a demand management model, and that will require change right across the sort of 20,000 strong workforce. We do have a track record of taking our workers through significant transformation. A number of years ago, we made the decision to adopt autonomy for all of our mining haul fleet, and that means that we've taken drivers out of those haul trucks. We now have a fully autonomous mining fleet, the biggest in the world, and we had to take those workers on that transition with us, and we did that. We didn't make anybody redundant. No one lost their job. We retrained, we reskilled, we showed people that there were new jobs, that they had already had some skills, but we did need to invest heavily, and we had to work with government, and we had to work with the education institutions as well to make sure that we were actually on a pathway that would take a workforce to a much more digitised, data-driven mining operation, and that's been very successful. So I think the track record is there. But the transition we're on at the moment will fundamentally change the skills of a number of those workers. We've got a good core base that we can retrain and reskill, but we still need the workers of the future as well. And because of the ambitions we have and the investment we're making in new technologies, that means that we also need a different skill set. And that's been important for us, working with government, working with those education institutions. The concern is it's not happening at exactly the pace that we want it, because our goal is to eliminate emissions by 2030. Here we are in 2023. The clock is ticking. So we really have to make sure that we don't see the availability of skills as a roadblock to that transition, because we're absolutely committed to that transition. We think it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. We see energy costs increasing, the introduction of other, whether it's carbon charges or other costs that are not currently across our organisation. So this is a way of mitigating risk in the future, but we have to make sure that we have the workers that we need. It's not easy. Where I think for a large industrial company, we're actually ahead of the curve. So we're already identifying these challenges and working with providers. The good thing is that our workers are really energised by what we're doing. The goal to decarbonise our operations has 100% support right across our entire workforce, regardless of the fact that some of those skills and trades will no longer be required, because we won't need a diesel mechanic. We'll need somebody who can work on a battery electric truck, and so they will need to be reskilled and retrained. But there's absolutely a real sense of commitment right across the workforce, and we're attracting new talent because of the ambitions of our goal. So people who actually don't want to work in the heavy emitting industries anymore, that actually want to be part of a company that is transitioning rapidly, we're actually attracting that talent. So that's, but we want everyone to share in this, because this is a global challenge. It's not just a challenge for us, it's a global challenge, a global transition. So we do need to work closely with regulators. In Australia, there is good government support as well, because we operate in regional areas. The Commissioner talked about the coal industry. We've seen in Australia the coal industry, very strong government support to provide retraining and reskilling opportunities in our country for people who are going to be impacted by the energy transition. Coordinating all of that is a role that business can play, and we're certainly taking the lead on that, but we are working very closely with regulators. But attracting talent isn't so much the issue, but getting the right skills at the time that we need it is obviously still a challenge, but we're making good progress.
Before I go to Paddy, so you're a big employer, especially in the areas where you're operating, right? You must be the biggest employer in the local area in many cases. So when you talk to provincial government, state government, and the federal government, are they listening to you when you say, look, this is how we see the talent pipeline, this is what our needs are going to be? I mean, where's the level of the debate at the moment in Australia?
Well, we had a change of federal government last year, and I think firstly we've got a much more ambitious climate change agenda in Australia. So I think that's a positive. The government is engaging with business. I think the alignment of skills and the availability of those skills is not as advanced as the broader climate targets, and that's a role that we as business can play. I don't think there's any issue with getting access to the right people to have those discussions. I mean, Australia is actually in a fantastic position to create a new export market of renewable energy because we have an abundance of renewable energy, and no government in Australia wants to miss out on that opportunity. Coordinating between federal government and then the various states, again, that requires some level of coordination. So we're not there yet, it's not perfect, but I think the ambition's there, we're getting the right policy settings in place, and we as business can play a role in making sure that we can coordinate with government. And the doors are open, so we can have those discussions, and I think that's really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So, Paddy Pamathan from Aqua, so you've been on the leading edge of the green energy transition for a number of years, right? So talk to us about, as a company that's been investing in renewable energy on that, talk about the energy industry itself. So it's got to reskill as an industry. Every company's facing this. And then, I think it's quite well known that some of the companies that are identified with the sort of fossil fuel energy industry have problems to recruit in certain markets as well. But how do you see from the energy sector, how do you see this all playing out?
Thank you. Delighted to be here. A lot of the conversation out there is about increasing interest rates, rampant inflation, supply chain constraints, geopolitical tensions. What are we going to do with energy transition? The real concern that we have is, I think, the skill issue is being grossly underestimated. Mm-hmm. This 66% that I see there is to do with certain sectors. We need to step back and think about the enormous amount of capacity ramp-up that is needed for components that needs to go into the renewable energy systems, the inputs that then go into those components, all the way back to so coal mining, finished. We need to ramp up zinc mining at a phenomenal rate. We need to, people don't talk about zinc, it's all about copper. Copper, yes, there are so many metals and minerals, and it's not an issue of they're not there, it's just that we need to set up the mines, we need to employ the people. There is increasing levels of automation coming, but there is a huge amount of people that's required. A significant part of energy transition is also, because the technology is there, it allows us to serve the unserved and the underserved. And it's happening. The rooftops in the middle of nowhere, they don't get put in by robots. They're put in by people who have got to be skilled, who have got to have, and it's not just putting the robots and setting the payment mechanism, the digital solutions. It's about then follow through. So there's a whole range of, it's not just about new skills, it's just the numbers. So I think we need to be very careful. In order to ramp up production capacity of solar panels, okay, fine, it's 5 years. And it's happening. And we're going to go through the same story. Boom, glut, boom, fine. Money is enormous, a huge amount of money actually is available for the right, appropriately sort of structured projects. Dealing with people issue is not just 5 years. You can't just 5 years change. It's generational. We need to get training from bottom up, from kindergarten level at primary, the right kind. And I think there is a huge mismatch. We're not able to move fast enough to the needs of the world of today and the needs of what we can see ahead of us. We can see it now, but then it takes a long time for it to feed back into the policymakers. As private sector, one of the things that we do, Aqua, we are growing fairly fast, renewable energy now operating in 14 countries. South Africa, right the way to Uzbekistan, Morocco, right across to Indonesia. And a lot of the stuff that we do, they tend to be very large plants, 1,000 megawatt PV plant, 2,000 megawatt wind farm, single projects. Every investment decision we make now, in every country, we look at the manpower resource requirements, not just for overseeing the construction or during the construction period, but how can we maintain and manage these assets over 25 years? And put in the necessary training programs up front. When we started to think about going to Uzbekistan as a new investment destination, we kind of took a decision, put in some staff, started to sort of get into the landscape. We immediately set up a training school because we recognized right up front that there was a massive technical skill shortage. Way back when we founded the company back in 2005 in Saudi Arabia, by 2007, we set up a huge training school in north of Jeddah. We churn out 500 technicians every year, 600 technicians every year, focused on the power plant operation, desalinated plant operation. So those are the kind of things. But these are all, what is 600 people? We're going to need 6 million before we're done. And that is the challenge that we have, and I think we need to recognize that, and we need to elevate the conversation, share the information, get people enthused, and get the young people to understand the opportunity that's ahead of us. I'm not sort of ignoring the reskilling. I think there is such a demand. I think that's the easiest, that's the lowest hanging fruit. Here is a bunch of people who have been doing hard work. They know how to work. They know how to go to work, at the right time in the morning. So reskilling them, bringing them, it's not so straightforward, but that is the easier part than ramping up the human resource capacity.
So notwithstanding the great work and the report that WEF has come out with others, we're underestimating the potential break that this could provide on the renewable energy revolution of the green transition. So we're underestimating it. The public debate is mainly around reskilling and sort of still very much focused on certain industries, as you were talking about, the jobs that really aren't going to exist anymore in the industries that really won't exist anymore. So this concept of the greening of jobs across every part of the economy is not well understood yet, right? I don't think any country's education system has really shifted yet. I mean, and I sort of sit managing a graduate school and I'm kind of horrified when I sort of do my work on the energy transition and I look at, what the curriculum is in high school and technical high schools. So where does the LinkedIn industry policymaker come together to sort of provide that skills value chain, right? I mean, you're saying we've got to go back to elementary school. Rishi Sunak got shot down the other day for suggesting that people needed to do math all the way through to 18 in the UK. But in a digitalised world, certain data skills are kind of fundamental now for any job, even if you want to work in sustainable fashion. So how does the handshake between public policy, the LinkedIns of this world, the job markets of this world and the private sector, how does that come together? Paddy, you want to go first?
Yeah, look, I think it can only come together by having these kind of conversations, by engaging at the right level and presenting the data, okay? I think the devil is in the detail. It's very easy to talk very superficially, so we need to sit down and show that, look, so here is the transition in your country, this is what's going to happen over the next 20 years, and look at these numbers. And if you do that, and we are doing that in the case of some countries, it's very, very obvious, the gaps. And then it is very obvious how we can potentially start plugging the gaps. But coming back to it, I'm an optimist, as the other end of optimism, as you know very well. But on this one, I am pessimistic, simply because the human side, changing mindsets, is the hardest part. Taking people along with us is the most difficult part. And it's not about, and it's starting them young and taking them forward. And for that, we need the mothers and fathers and the grandmothers and grandfathers to also support. So it's a big publicity exercise. And we've got to really create the attention.
But
none of it is happening, by the way. That's
young people only want to work. I mean, the ones that have a choice, right? They want to work for a firm. The data would seem to support that they want to work for cleaner, greener, future modern firms. I mean, what do you see? I mean, is that generation going to drive things faster, or we need to provide them with the skills to get there?
So it's already shown up in the data that people who are in Gen Z and the millennial generation have a greater concentration of green skills across all the different age groups that LinkedIn looks at. So absolutely, there are people in these age groups who are seeking this kind of work because it's part of what they want to do, and they realize it's a huge challenge that they are unfortunately going to bear a lot of the responsibility for solving. I think there is perhaps a parallel to be drawn between the kind of demand that we are seeing in the green skills world and the kind we saw, to your point about digitalization, in the basically the technology boom and what it meant for the job market in that space. So first, it meant that people were paid a lot more money, and because companies will pay to get the talent they absolutely need. Second thing is actually there were alternative pathways to get into technology jobs because technology firms realized that if they just used the existing structures, it was never going to work, right? The third thing is it spawned a collection of training institutions, which we've all heard about, the coding boot camps, the Google certificates, et cetera. These things which basically only existed because there was such a strong demand for a particular set of skills. And then finally, companies who are working in technology are willing to hire based on skills alone and skip questions around degrees and certifications and so forth. Just because they need the people who can do the work, they're willing to look beyond the normal signals they would pay attention to. This is actually a tremendously valuable thing. And in LinkedIn, we actually see expansions of the talent pool by factors of 10 when you get outside the standard degree model. The number of people who suddenly become potential candidates for a role just jumps incredibly. Those are all things which were discovered in trying to solve the problem of how do I get enough engineers to come work with me at Google. So I think there's hope that those kinds of systems, and to be clear, I mean, organizations like yours, like Infosys and so forth, have set up training academies to be able to turn people out as well. Infosys has amazing facilities for building tech talent. So there's lots of possibilities. The only other thing I would mention in terms of like the overlap with policy is that, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, it can be part of the industrial policy that governments put forward to include preparing for this kind of human resource need, for this kind of talent need. So if you say, well, we're putting, like the IRA did, $369 billion into the world of climate, maybe there's another 50 billion, which we can put into making sure that we're building up the set of human resources that are necessary to enable the transformation. And I'll just add one more note. Sorry, I've been going on a long time. One more note. When you look at the distribution of the green skills around the world, they are unsurprisingly vastly concentrated in the global north and in the richest countries in the world, right? So much needs to happen in the global south. And I think you can even make an argument that it is possible to structure investment deals, maybe working with I'm not putting them on the spot, but with the IMF or the World Bank or whoever's investing in making sure that we're building infrastructure, to include training and skilling as a component.
So across the EU, so famously we've got, parts of the world that were the heartland of the old energy economy, right? And then and now with renewable energy, and you were talking about the last mile first, right? This is ubiquitous, right? I mean, obviously there are renewable energy superpowers as well, because of their solar resources or whatever. But the technical skills, the digitalized skills for energy efficiency, the retrofitting, I mean, these things will be ubiquitous. But how does it? Do you see that you could sell the message of this green jobs transition in a way that overcomes the fact that it normally gets boiled down into, well, this region of this country is going to be a loser, And yes, the winners might be younger or they might be in another region. I mean, can you, at a European scale, can you manage that?
Yeah, I think this is a major concern. That's an absolute priority, not to provoke disruptions and more fragmentation also between regions. And especially, we all know when regions are in decline all over, it's very difficult to rebuild. It takes a long time to rebuild. And then you have a lot of problems because people leave, the young leave, and to relaunch a region, to rebuild an economic basis in a region which has been in decline is really, and we see it in Europe, we see it very clearly in the US and in some other countries. This is really an issue. And that's what we want to try to avoid. And this is the message to the regions, that there are new opportunities which have to come immediately, which we have to integrate into our plan immediately, not saying, okay, we have to close and then we will see. No, we have to deal immediately with the alternatives. I was in Eastern Germany, which is a very special area also in political terms and sensitiveness. And there are coal mines which will be closed. But they are working now on the replacement, especially in renewables. And finally, the people working in the coal mines and some in the big energy facilities, well, they can relatively easily be retrained. But you have to make sure that people get this confidence that there will be a life after their present job. Not for them only, by the way, also for their kids. So I think this is the mindset issue which we have really to take care of. I just want to add, I fully agree with the extension to our neighbors in the south. Because I think this is, we cannot just think that we will be successful on this transformation, and then the south, they have to deal and try to. I think first they have a lot of opportunities now. They have the sun, which is very often there, where they have all kinds of renewable resources. And this will allow us to build new partnerships, by the way. Hydrogen is one, electricity. Well, now, why not import electricity? There are plans to import electricity from Morocco through big solar panel farms. So I think there are a lot of opportunities also to rebalance the development, and especially with countries in the south, be it in Asia, but also especially for the Europeans in Africa. So because if we are not doing it, we will have other problems. So I think this is something which I fully agree, and this means we have to skill these people. We have to skill them, by the way, bringing them to Europe, skilling them here or skilling them over there, and then develop in partnership all these activities. So I think this has to go together. Europe, one thing, but also our partnerships with our neighbors.
So I'm just going to I'm going to come back to you, Elizabeth, towards the closing, but I'll just open it up. Are there any questions from the audience? Any comments? Any major employers? Anybody going through an identity shift change? So Elizabeth, as you go from being a resources company to being a renewable energy company that has a resource component, I mean, can you? I mean, in the mining communities that I know, in the mining communities I've worked in, it's a deep part of the identity, right? The relationship to the mines. So, with the better jobs, better paid jobs, cleaner jobs, better conditions or whatever sometimes for these jobs, do you think you could be as important a part of a community as you become a renewable energy powerhouse as you were a mining company or a resource company?
We're already seeing really strong engagement at a community level. We're already installing large-scale renewable energy in areas of remote Western Australia that haven't had renewable energy. So we've had to engage with the traditional custodians of the land. There's the whole regulatory approvals process, environmental approvals. So it's a complex process. And to get through that, you actually need community support, because otherwise people could object to those applications. So we're finding that there is very strong community engagement and a recognition that this will create the jobs of the future. and it will also obviously change the climate outlooks. So I'm optimistic. I tend to be an optimist around the support for this transition. I think that globally there's a recognition that this is occurring and that this can be quite rapid. I think we are in an interesting decade with that volatility of energy prices, the security of energy supply. It's the last 2 years alone have made people really rethink some of those questions. And even in Australia, we're seeing increases in the cost of energy, not probably as acute as we've seen here in Europe, obviously. But so it's high on everyone's agenda. Communities do obviously get behind anything that will create local jobs. Mining has been a really important part of the Australian economy, but I tend to agree that the opportunities with renewable energy are truly global. It's not as though there's an iron ore precinct in Western Australia where we operate and our competitors operate, but renewable energy is much more broadly dispersed and it's global. So I think we've got a really good opportunity to make sure that those other parts of the globe also benefit from this transition, that we do provide those opportunities. We work with other governments, and I have a view that communities will really get behind these opportunities because it is much more, I guess, equally dispersed, not entirely equal, but it's not as concentrated as some of those resource operations which only really occur in certain regions. So I do think that this is a broader global opportunity that will provide that platform to create probably that more just transition. Finding the people to do that and training those people does require an enormous discipline, and you need to take communities on that journey. We do that currently in our mining operations. We provide entry-level jobs. We have programs, training academies for those people for a guaranteed job in the mining sector if they complete the course. So it's getting beyond that sort of university style. It's about not even qualified trades. This is entry level. But once we find people are in the industry, then they really come along. And from a community perspective, that's been incredibly important.
So if we just break this down, we can see all of these component parts of what it's going to take to build a value chain of talent that's going to be on stream at the right time, in the right place for these incredible transitions. But that's an extraordinarily complicated dance between the public sector, the private sector, the education and training sector, and everybody else in between. And I think there's some pretty big questions that we haven't addressed on this panel, which we'll also have to address in future WEFs and whatever, which is that sometimes the talent, right, the youthful populations are in some parts of the world and the greying populations are in others. And so there is a sort of talent across boundaries issue here as well. And I think in very few jurisdictions in the world, very few countries in the world, is that sort of immigration, migration debate coming together with this talent debate. So more work for us to do. But the extraordinary opportunity of new jobs, many of the jobs we haven't even been able to think of today. I have a 17-year-old son filling in his college applications at the moment. I'm like, we have no idea what the jobs you may be doing in 10, 15, 20 years look like. Some of them we will, some of them we won't. So the excitement around that opportunity, but making sure that skills development is in the curriculum from elementary all the way through. And then this sort of handshake between technical education, the curriculum in public education and private education, all the way through then to what the private sector is saying about what kind of needs and demands it wants. And then, I think the sort of non-formal piece of it, like the apprenticeship, but even outside of apprenticeship, just making sure you've got skills ready as demand grows will be very important. I run a graduate school in the northeast of the United States, where most of the investment coming into the offshore wind sector is coming from Europe and Asia. And one of the brakes on investment is going to be, if they can't access the talent pipeline. So this is something that we see universally. But the World Economic Forum has brought together a jobs consortium follow this and check in with this. So this is an attempt to bring together public sector, private sector, and the education sector around solving these problems in real time, or at least improving the quality of the dialogue. But I think as we get ready to continue the conversations here at WEF, and we look at the future of what we do with this Jobs of Tomorrow report, you can see that we cannot allow this to be a binding constraint on a revolution in our economies, because it's going to be a great thing. And so we've got a lot of, I think, hustle to do in order to make sure we can move forward. Please thank the panel, great panel. Good luck, all of you, and thank you very much for coming to the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.